They laughed at the janitor until they learned who he really was. Thomas Parker moved silently through the marble hallways of Baxter Industries, a place that once bore his name. Now, he was just the janitor, the man people barely noticed, or worse, mocked. Dressed in a faded uniform, pushing a cleaning cart, he had become invisible in the empire he built decades ago. Employees walked past without acknowledging him, too busy chasing promotions and profit margins to care about the old man mopping the floors. "Careful, old man, don't slip on your own mess," one executive chuckled, stepping over a freshly mopped section. Laughter followed as Thomas wiped the sweat off his brow and kept his head down. He was used to it. 30 years ago, these same halls echoed with respect when he walked through them as CEO. But that was before Leonard Davis, his former business partner, betrayed him, using legal loopholes to strip him of everything he owned. Now, Thomas watched his company thrive under Leonard's name, while he scrubbed floors. But one person noticed him. Jake Reynolds, a 22-year-old intern, was the only one who ever greeted Thomas with respect. Every morning, without fail, Jake would say, "Good morning, Mr. Parker," as if the janitor deserved the same dignity as the executives upstairs. One afternoon, Jake saw something that made him stop in his tracks. Thomas was struggling to lift a heavy box of cleaning supplies, his frail frame shaking under the weight. Without hesitation, Jake rushed over. "Here, sir, let me help you." Thomas looked up, surprised. No one ever offered to help him. They either ignored him or added to his burden. "You don't have to do that, son," Thomas said. Jake shrugged. "It's no big deal." But it was a big deal. Because in that moment, Jake became the first person in years to treat Thomas like he mattered. As Jake lifted the box effortlessly, Thomas saw something rare in this building: genuine kindness. He nodded in appreciation. "You're a good kid, Jake." What Jake didn't know was that this small act of kindness was about to change his life forever. Jake wiped his hands on his pants after setting the heavy box down. "There you go, Mr. Parker," he said with a smile. Thomas nodded, still taken aback by the intern's willingness to help. It had been years since anyone showed him kindness inside this building. "Call me Thomas," he said. Jake chuckled. "All right, Thomas." As Jake was about to leave, he hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." Jake glanced around before lowering his voice. "You've been here for years, right? Longer than almost anyone?" Thomas smirked. "Longer than they realized." "Something like that." Jake leaned in slightly. "So, why do you still work here? I mean, no offense, but a place like this doesn't usually keep janitors around for that long." Thomas let out a low chuckle. "That's a long story, kid." He grabbed a rag and began wiping down a nearby counter. But Jake wasn't ready to drop the subject. "I heard a rumor once," he continued, "about a guy who used to run this company. He built it from nothing, but then he lost everything in some kind of scandal. I don't know all the details, but..." Jake stopped when he saw the look in Thomas's eyes. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. A long silence stretched between them before Thomas finally spoke. That guy was me. Jake's jaw nearly dropped. Wait, what? Thomas leaned against his mop handle, looking up at the ceiling as if replaying a painful memory. I founded Baxter Industries when I was 25. Built it from the ground up. Worked night and day to turn it into something real. Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then how did you end up? He gestured around at the mop, the janitor's uniform, the life Thomas now had. Thomas's eyes darkened. Leonard Davis. My business partner. My best friend, or so I thought. Jake listened, captivated. We built this company together, Thomas continued. But once the money started rolling in, Leonard got greedy. He made backdoor deals, used legal loopholes to push me out. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. He took everything, my shares, my position, even my name from the company. Jake shook his head in disbelief. And no one fought for you? Thomas laughed bitterly. People don't fight for the losing side, kid. They go where the power is. Jake felt a surge of anger. So why stay here? Why not leave and start over? Thomas met Jake's gaze, his expression unreadable. Then he smirked. Because, kid, I'm not done yet. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had no idea that this janitor, this forgotten legend, was just waiting for the right moment to take everything back. Jake couldn't shake the conversation he'd had with Thomas. The janitor he had always respected wasn't just another worker. He was the rightful founder of Baxter Industries. And yet, he had spent years silently cleaning the floors of the company he built, waiting. For what? Revenge? Redemption? The thought gnawed at Jake for days. Then, one evening, as Jake was leaving late from the office, he noticed Thomas again. The old man was struggling to move a broken-down janitor's cart. Its wheels jammed as he tried to push it toward the supply closet. Jake didn't hesitate. He walked over and grabbed the cart's handle. Here, let me help, he said. Thomas sighed, shaking his head. You don't have to, kid. Jake smirked. Yeah, you said that last time too. They pushed the cart together until it was finally out of the way. Thomas stretched his aching back and let out a low chuckle. You're too good for this place, you know that? Jake shrugged. I just believe in treating people the right way. Thomas studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He held it out. Jake hesitated. What's this? Call it a thank you gift, Thomas said. Investment advice. Jake frowned. You invest? Thomas grinned knowingly. You don't run $1 billion company without knowing how to make money, kid. Jake unfolded the paper and read what was written on it, a stock name, a price, and a date. This stock is set to blow up, Thomas said simply. Buy in while it's cheap. Jake blinked, skeptical. Wait, how do you even know this? Thomas chuckled. Let's just say I still have friends in high places. Jake stared at the paper, debating whether or not to trust the advice of a man who had once lost everything. But something told him that Thomas wasn't the kind of man to give out empty advice. So, that night, Jake took a risk. He put every dollar of his small savings account into the stock Thomas recommended. And within 2 weeks, his investment had tripled. Jake couldn't believe it. He had just made more money in a week than he had in the last 6 months of working as an intern. And he wasn't the only one who noticed. Because while Jake celebrated his sudden rise, his growing success caught the attention of Leonard Davis himself. And suddenly, the game was about to change. Jake sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen in shock. The stock Thomas had told him about had skyrocketed, and his initial investment had turned into a small fortune. It was the kind of opportunity that only insiders knew about, and somehow, Thomas, the janitor, had known before anyone else. Jake wasn't the only one who noticed his sudden success. One morning, as he walked through the office, a voice called out behind him. "Mr. Reynolds, got a minute?" Jake turned around and saw Leonard Davis, CEO of Baxter Industries and the man who had stolen the company from Thomas, standing in the hallway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Jake swallowed. This wasn't good. Yes, sir," Jake said quickly. Leonard gave a thin-lipped smile and gestured for Jake to follow him. He led him into his massive corner office, the kind that had a skyline view, leather chairs, and an air of absolute power. Leonard sat down behind his desk and laced his fingers together. "I hear you've been making some impressive moves in the stock market," he said. Jake hesitated. I just got lucky, sir." Leonard chuckled, but his eyes stayed cold. "See, I don't believe in luck. I believe in information." And somehow, an intern, a kid who barely makes coffee, managed to land an investment deal that some of my top analysts missed. Jake's pulse quickened. He knew. Leonard leaned forward. "So tell me, who gave you that tip?" Jake felt his stomach drop. He couldn't just throw Thomas under the bus. So he shook his head. "I just did some research." Leonard raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" He tapped a button on his desk, and the large TV screen on the wall flickered on. Security footage played. Jake's breath caught. The screen showed him and Thomas in the janitor's closet. It wasn't clear what they were discussing, but it was enough to raise suspicions. Leonard smirked. "So, let me guess, the janitor told you?" Jake didn't answer, but his silence said enough. Leonard sat back, amused. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, do you?" Jake clenched his fists. He knew exactly who Leonard was. He was a liar, a thief, and a man who destroyed lives for power. Leonard sighed, standing up. "Here's what's going to happen, kid. You're going to tell me everything that janitor knows. Because if he's playing the stock market, then he has connections I want. And if you don't cooperate..." He let the threat hang in the air. Jake swallowed hard. He had two choices: sell out Thomas and keep his job, or protect the man who had trusted him and risk everything. And in that moment, Jake made his decision. He stood up and met Leonard's eyes. "Sir," he said, his voice steady, "I think we're done here." Leonard's smile disappeared. Jake turned and walked out of the office, knowing full well that he had just made a very dangerous enemy. But what he didn't know was that Thomas had been waiting for this moment for years. And the time to strike back had finally come. Jake's heart pounded as he left Leonard's office. He had just refused one of the most powerful men in the company, maybe in the entire industry. He knew there would be consequences. But when he stepped out into the hallway, Thomas was already waiting for him. The old janitor leaned against his mop, his sharp eyes watching Jake carefully. "He called you in, didn't he?" Jake exhaled. "He knows, Thomas. About the stock tip. He wanted me to sell you out." Thomas smirked. "And what did you tell him?" Jake squared his shoulders. "I told him nothing." For the first time since they met, Thomas looked truly impressed. He nodded slowly. "Then I think it's time to show you the real reason I've stayed here all these years." He motioned for Jake to follow him. They walked through the dim hallways until they reached a maintenance door that led to the archived records room, a place few people even remembered existed. Thomas pulled out a keycard and swiped it. The door clicked open. Jake hesitated. "How do you still have access to this?" Thomas chuckled. "I built this company, kid. I may not have my name on the building anymore, but I still know its secrets." Inside, dust-covered file cabinets lined the walls. Thomas walked straight to one marked 1993, -2000 and pulled out a thick folder. He dropped it onto a table and flipped it open. Jake's eyes widened. It was all there. Documents. Signatures. Financial records. Everything Leonard had done to steal Baxter Industries from Thomas, buried deep in archives no one had checked in decades. Jake ran a hand through his hair. This is enough to take him down." Thomas nodded. "It's been sitting here for years, waiting for the right moment. And that moment is now." Jake looked up. "What are we going to do?" Thomas smiled, the kind of cold, knowing smile of a man who had waited a long time for justice. "We're going to expose him," he said. "And I'm going to take my company back." By noon, the entire boardroom was in chaos. Jake and Thomas had leaked the documents to key investors, journalists, and, most importantly, the company's board of directors. The evidence was undeniable. Leonard had committed fraud, manipulated financial reports, and illegally ousted Thomas from his own company. When Leonard stormed into the boardroom, he found the entire board waiting for him, including Thomas, now sitting at the head of the table. "What the hell is this?" Leonard spat. One of the senior board members threw the file in front of him. "It's over, Leonard. We know everything." Leonard's face went pale. You can't do this." But Thomas leaned forward, his hands folded together. "You did this to yourself." By the end of the hour, Leonard was removed from his position, escorted out of the building by security. And as he walked past, Jake couldn't help but smile. Justice had finally been served. 1 week later, a new era. Thomas stood in his corner office once again, the place he had built, the place he had lost, and now, the place he had taken back. He turned to Jake. "You saved my company, kid." Jake shook his head. "No. You saved yourself. I just helped." Thomas chuckled. "Either way, I think it's time we make this official." He pulled out a contract and slid it across the desk. Jake blinked as he read the words. Vice President of Operations. "You proved yourself, Jake," Thomas said. "You saw past what everyone else ignored. You chose loyalty when it mattered. I want you running this place with me." Jake could barely breathe. I don't know what to say." Thomas smirked. "Say yes." Jake grinned. "Yes." As Jake settled into his new office, he looked out over the city. A year ago, he had been just another intern. Now, he was running one of the biggest companies in the industry. And all because he had helped a janitor carry a box. Thomas's words echoed in his mind. Kindness isn't just about doing the right thing. Sometimes, it changes everything. And as Jake sat back in his chair, he knew one thing for sure. He would never overlook another janitor again.